right, we are right at 6:30, so I'll call tonight's workshop to order. And Karen, could we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Husnick. Councilmember Valento.
Here.
Councilmember Erickson.
Here.
Councilmember Roberts.
Here.
And Mayor Bain.
Here. I'd like to invite everyone to rise and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
A quick note on our workshop format this evening, just a reminder that we are in a workshop session. This is intended to be a working session of council. More informal than what you would typically see in a city council meeting. Anything that we discuss tonight that requires official action will come back before council for official vote. Tonight is indeed just a working session. Like we start all meetings, happy to start tonight with open forum, and open forum is any interested party's opportunity to address council on any topic of your choosing. And Karen, do we have anybody for open forum this evening? All right, no takers. We'll get started then. First item tonight for consideration is the Broadway Avenue Holiday Bridge Lighting discussion topic.
Yes, I think we should wait until after the budget presentation to do that, because we have a list of other items that we need to discuss as a whole, and that's one of them,
Understood. Let's hold
if that's
that.
okay with
That-
everybody.
That is okay. Let's hold and revisit that topic once we've got full context of the 2024 proposed budget. And Kevin, are you kicking us off?
Yeah, I will. Kevin's going to kick us off just for the council's information. We're going to go over two things tonight, basically. We're going to give you a recap again of the 10-year plan. This has been a work in progress for quite a while. And the budget that you will see after the 10-year plan is a result of the 10-year plan. We've seen it all. We've given you all the information. We've kind of given you the direction where we're going to go. That's all going to be in the budget this year. So you will see what the 10-year plan calls for in the proposed 2024 budget.
Very good.
All right, thank you, Patrick. Mayor and City Council members, so like Patrick said, we're going to begin tonight reviewing the 10-year capital plan. These are plans that have been presented to you previously. You have seen all these plans before at previous work sessions and discussions at council meetings. It's just a reminder, another briefing on what's in those plans, and then now we'll carry over into more of our 2024 proposed budget discussion and the general fund. My computer's wanting to restart right now, so.
And is Kevin's mic working? There you go.
It's working, but the computer decided to restart, so I might shift to mine.
Oh, sorry about that.
We don't have the right connection.
There we go. Yep.
Okay. Sorry about that. So we're getting going here. So like I was saying, we're going to start with the 10-year capital plan. We'll review some of the things that were previously presented to City Council. So feel free to stop me along the way if you have any questions, or I'd be happy to take any questions at the end of this presentation before we go into the next one. I did email out the presentation to all of you recently, and I do have printed copies for you up there as well. So you do have those electronically and in paper format for tonight's meeting, just so you're aware. And it just went on the website as well. So all these documents are available for the public to look at, including the 2024 proposed budget. The 10-year capital plan is out there as well, as well as both of these presentations for the public to go out and view those as well. So let's begin with this reminder what a 10-year capital plan is. It really looks at what the anticipated needs are for the city as a whole. And not only it anticipates what those needs are, but also identifies how the city is going to fund those, whether it's in capital improvements, if it relates to streets, parks, city-owned buildings, and equipment. So it's not only scheduling out those needs that the city is going to need in the next 10 years, is identifying how the city is going to pay for those needs as well. So that just leads to the next bullet point. It's really a planning tool for the city. It not only looks at the current year budget, it really presents a picture of where the city, what the city needs are in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, to see what the city can be doing now to be ready for the future, looking more to be proactive rather more than reactive to things. And these 10-year plans are updated every year. It's important for the city to look at these as needs change, costs change, just to make sure that we have everything included in those plans. And it's really an important tool for when the city does issue debt. Rating agencies do look at these plans. They like to see these, that the city is planning for the future and has funding identified. So it's a key piece when those rating agency calls, they do like to see these plans. That really leads into why it's a 10-year capital plan needed. And first off, is identified in the strategic plan as objective number 1, is to develop a sound financial and infrastructure plan. That's what this is. This is laying out where the city's needs are from an infrastructure standpoint, as well as financial. It lays out the costs, and as I mentioned before, the revenue sources. So we have funds available to pay for those as they come up. There's also a council mandate to have a plan. It was brought up by councils a few years ago that we need to have a 10-year plan identified and implemented in the city. So that's where this is coming from as well. It also is required for certain funding sources, some of them being some state grant funding. When you get a state grant and there's example of 50-50 match, they want to see a document that lays out that you have a plan to fund your portion of the project. That's what this is. So if this, like with the city was successful in obtaining money for Eureka Avenue, if something comes up where you can get a grant, we can say we have a source identified for maybe a 50-50 match. So it's important for that standpoint. And then also for park dedication fees. If you're going to take in park dedication fees, you need to have a plan. You cannot take in those fees without a set plan. And also looking at this is it also identifies, try to smooth out those peaks and valleys of the tax levy. We rather have those consistent increases, not a big significant increase and decrease. We rather keep that and maintain a consistent increase going forward. Well, that's when we're looking at capital financing. Is really, are we going to bond for it, issue debt for these projects, or pay as you go? So some of the reasons why a government might issue bond is for facilities, which could be for city-owned buildings, streets, parks, things of that nature. That leads into infrastructure as well, where you have your streets, utility systems, and any sidewalks and trails as well. And then there are debt that you can issue for equipment, which the city will be looking at issuing equipment certificates, for example, fire truck purchases, which is a large equipment purchases pushing close to $750,000 or $1 million nowadays, where it's not just your normal pickup truck or things of that nature where debt might be needed on those. There's some pros and cons to each type of financing. Pay as you go is where you're paying for those projects that equipment needs with cash and reserves. These are usually used for more short-term assets, meaning 5-10 years. You don't usually see cash reserves being used for say, your 20-25 year street reconstructions. as to try to have those cash reserves on hand is quite a significant undertaking, where those are usually financed by debt. That's just the next bullet point where it's just difficult to save for those. Also, pay-as-you-go, one of the disadvantages is the concept of those who pay now might not benefit from the future use. You might have to get those cash reserves on hand. Your current residents and citizens are paying for that now, where they might leave the city or go there, where now they're not paying for that benefit. So it's something to consider when you're looking at it. These plans do take into consideration some both. What do we want to fund with cash? What are we going to fund with debt? So the 10-year plan does have some of both in there to try to even those out. And debt issuances preserves cash and resources and allows some flexibility. The cost of project is usually amortized over the life of the debt, meaning if you have a 20-year street project that you reconstruct, and you need to come reconstruct that in 20 years, usually your debt will be over 20 years, so it serves the life of that street, for example. On the assets paid by current and future beneficiaries, as there's a tax levy tied to make those debt payments. So, and those debt levies are set and scheduled when you issue debt. So it's very easy to plan. You know what those tax levies are going to be. They're set by the bond when it's issued. So there's no surprises when it comes to what you need to levy for those debt issuances. So with that, I'll go over some of the highlights of the Park Dedication Fund capital plan. The capital plan that was presented and provided to you is following the 2016 and draft park master plan. These are areas, these are projects and things that were identified in 2016 as well as a draft master plan. It does propose a property tax increase of 500,000 to 500,000, I should say, and maintain at that level. In 2023, it was 50,000. In 2024, proposed tax levy is 500,000 and keeping at that $500,000 level for the next 10 years. Also taking into consideration that this fund would be issuing bonds in 2024 and 2028. Capital Improvement Fund, this identifies project by funding source. There's a lot of different funding sources in this plan. You get your state aid maintenance and state aid for projects. There's a property tax levy in this fund, as well as franchise fees to fund projects. And there are some bond issuances that are identified for the full street reconstructions. It is note that this city did receive $4.5 million for the Eureka Avenue reconstruction, which was a very good win for the city. This was planned to be issued or done through the issuance of bonds. So by attaining that funding, the city will not have to issue debt for this project, and will save taxpayers dollars where there won't be a levy tied to that project. Property tax levy is proposed to increase to $950,000 in 2024, and will maintain being at $950,000 in 2027, where it bumps up to $1 million. Capital equipment plan, each department updates their need for equipment and is adjusted by the estimated costs. The levy increase in this fund is $60,000 from 2023. This plan is following the schedule that was presented last year. Even with the adjustment of costs that we're seeing an increase in costs, this fund is still maintaining a good fund balance, healthy cash balance to make those payments. And that's part of the purpose of looking at these funds and having it, is having enough reserves on hand, not only to fund the equipment needs, but as things that come up that aren't necessarily planned for, the rising costs of equipment at a rapid rate, the city is able to still go ahead and make those purchases. With that, there was a planned bond issuance of equipment certificates in 2023 for the fire truck, 2 fire truck purchases and snowplow purchases. That has not been issued yet, based on the fact that there's been delays in receiving those products, but the city is looking to issue those in spring of 2024 to cover the cost of those purchases. Next, we're going to looking at look at the utility funds, this reminding council of what you'll see on those schedules as well as the target cash balance. The target cash balance is set as 50% of operating expenditures and also paying for all capital items that are identified as being paid by cash reserves and being able to pay 100% of debt payments, principal and interest. So that's where the target cash balance comes from. The fund needs to have those cash balances in reserve to keep the fund operating. Water rates, the 2024 rates are currently approved at a 6% increase, and it's proposed at a 6% increase over the next 10 years. With determining that rate, we're looking at having that consistent increase and not those peaks and valleys, just like we talked about with the tax levy. And expenses are projected to increase by 3% for wages, and then all other expenses are projected to increase by 2%. The sewer rates are currently approved at a 5% increase. However, with looking at adjusting some projects around and working with Dave, we're looking at being able to only proposing a 3% increase in 2024 and maintaining that over the next 10 years. This highlights the importance of looking at these capital plans every year to see if there's any changes, not only in cost, but timing of projects to make sure that we're adjusting accordingly. Lastly, it's the surface water management rates. The 2024 rates, again, are currently approved at a 6% increase. The schedule is maintaining a 6% increase in those rates over the next 10 years. And the one note in this fund that's new is that there's a new position proposed related to surface water management, with 75% of this position being funded out of the surface water management fund and 25% being funded from the general fund. We're getting into a little detail in the next presentation on the proposed positions, with this one being included in there, but just wanted to mention it that this is reflected in that 10-year capital plan. So I know I went over that rather quickly. It was just more of a refresher of what was already presented to council and noting what the big highlights are of those funds. If there's any specific questions on those 10-year plans, I'd be happy to answer those. Otherwise, we can move forward.
Councilmember Erickson.
Just a couple of questions. Thinking about the park dedication, will 500,000 be enough 10 years from now? If we're not raising that, raising that need with inflation, I mean, is that, are we going to be coming back to later and increasing that?
We believe it's enough. The park dedication also calls for bonding in those out years as well, so it takes in debt service, so we're spreading that out. So we believe with these current projections, 500,000 will be adequate.
And then regarding Eureka, with the state covering that, what projects bumped up the list to try to tackle in lieu of having to spend money on Eureka?
I believe that Eureka is now in 2024, and I think it was North Shore went to 2025. But again, those are projects we'll have to bond for. Those are the major reconstructions.
Yeah, North Shore from Greenway to Highway 97 was 25. North Shore full reconstruction from Highway 61 to Greenway was in 26. 27 was Fenway Avenue. 28 was 12th Street Southwest.
So, but it was North Shore that got bumped up because we don't have to do Eureka. I mean, for bonding and paying for it.
Is it what?
I'm just curious. So, I mean, we were originally planning to bond for Eureka, right, and tackle that.
Nothing literally got bumped up. It's still sitting in those years because no funding's been identified yet or approved. If it was approved, then the years, yeah, they could change, but then that would affect proposing the budget.
Okay.
Right, and if it's, we have Eureka next year, which is a big project. We couldn't do Eureka and North Shore in the same year, basically. And the council will have to begin to talk about, and later in the presentation, you'll see us, when do we bond? Right now, we're talking to our financial advisors about when we bond, and we know that we'll have to bond at least somewhat in 24, but do we then combine that with the 25 bond issue to have a larger bond issue and go out to the market? And so we still have some things there, but those projects have been slated, and we just have to figure out how to pay for them, and there's no really other way than bonding at this point.
Thank you.
I had the same exact questions on my list as well, and I'm a little bit confused on the answer around Eureka Avenue. So,
Okay, so Eureka was funded for 20, was identified in 24. We had no funding source.
when we saw previous versions of the 10-year
Previous
plan.
versions
Yep,
would have been bonding.
correct. Oh, okay.
So now that we don't have to bond for it, we only have a very small amount for bond for park dedication and equipment certificates. So the question is, do we do a small bond or do we combine it with the 25 for the big North Shore Trail project in 25? And that's something the Ellers has to figure out, and we have to figure out with them, is where is it more advantageous for us to bond? Do we go past that 10 million bank qualified and have a bigger bond, which is usually more attractive to the investors, and tie that and compare that to what the current bonding rates are and what the interest rates are we're going to have to pay? Or do we wait a year? With this kind of project, right now, I would say we bond bigger in 24 and not bond in 25, and then bond again in 26 for the next set of projects. But that's just, I don't think interest rates are going to recede very quickly in the bond market. So probably better to do that now, earlier than later.
Then just to clarify, the 10-year plan has been adjusted for the anticipated funds from the state for Eureka, and those adjustments are rolling through what is in the 2024 budget. Okay. And then Councilmember Erickson had a follow-up question related to park dedication funds moving to 500,000 per year. The 10-year plan anticipates 500,000 from the general fund per year, right? As part of the levy, is that right?
From the levy, yes.
From the levy. And just for clarification, what was that amount last year?
50,000.
50,000. And so that is
Last year
the,
was, I believe, the first year we did that for the park dedication fund.
so 2 years ago, we were at 0. Last year, we moved to 50,000. And then with evaluation of park plan, 10-year plan is to move it to 500,000.
Right, and so
Okay.
with the park dedication, again, like streets, we believe the 500,000 will get us through, but we will also have to bond, and that takes into some of the debt service. And most of the bonding for parks is either part of Belts Park or delayed maintenance on and replacement of equipment, so.
Other questions so far? Ready for the next segment? We can always circle back as well.
Okay. So now this presentation will take in some of those considerations from the long-term capital plan, taking in what those levies are currently in those plans, and roll that into the whole proposed budget, mostly focusing in on the general fund. So some of the things, the challenges the city has had, and then some useful numbers for the council as well. Again, if you have any questions on anything I'm going over, you can stop me as we go. Otherwise, it's like the last time, we can answer any questions at the end of the presentation as well. So just to remind council, this was a 2024 budget calendar. So the first bullet point, August 21st, that's where we're at right now. We're reviewing the budget. We're going over the long-term capital projects just to present that to council. The key date on here, I'll skip down to the third bullet point, which is September 25th. At this council meeting, the city council needs to approve the preliminary tax levy. This levy, once this gets approved, this then is required to be submitted to the county by September 30th. Once this is approved and submitted to the county, the city cannot go higher than the levy submitted at this meeting. It can go down. So that's through our budget discussions today and at future council meetings and at our September workshop if needed. That's an important date and idea to keep in the city council's mind, is that whatever gets submitted and approved at that September 25th meeting, the city cannot go higher. We can always decrease that all the way until we approve the budget and the final 2024 tax levy. After that is approved, then October, November is when we make our final adjustments to the budget. where the city council would like to see that budget line. And then at the December 11th meeting is where we hold our truth and taxation public hearing meeting as required, and then adopt the 2024 tax levy and the 2024 budget. We've historically done it at this meeting just because the second meeting has been historically canceled due to the holiday season. So this is just a preliminary calendar now. If something does come up, we can adjust and always hold a meeting later in December if we need to. So what's a budget? It's the city's #1 policy document. It really drives what the city level of service the city wants to have and what initiatives the city council wants to have for the city and staff. So it's really just sets the tone for where the direction that the city is going. And that just leads into the next point. It's really a communication device. Here's what the level of service the city has. Here's the initiatives that the city has to move forward into 2024, but also looking into the future years as well. And again, it's used by rating agencies. When we issue debt, they're going to look at our budget to make sure we have a sound budget and plan going forward. So when we're issuing that debt, we can get the best credit rating available, so then we have the lowest possible interest rates. So what's the goal? When the staff is putting together the proposed budget, we're looking to provide the best service in the most efficient manner at the lowest cost to the community. We're always keeping that in mind when we're looking at what we're putting in the budget, looking at what initiatives and level of service that the city wants, while doing it as effectively and efficiently as possible. So with that, we're just jump into what the proposed tax levy summary looks like for 2020, what's being proposed for 2024. The top row is a general fund. You can see what's being proposed in 2024 is a $10.5 million levy in the general fund for about a $1.1 million increase. The capital equipment and capital improvement funds reflect the levies that have been presented in the capital improvement plan. The next line item of your debt service, and then in parentheses, current issues. This levy reflects the debt that the city has already issued, and the tax levy is associated with having to pay those off. So that levy cannot change, that is set by those bond documents. The next line item, the debt service proposed. This is where the city has built in an estimated tax levy that we will need to pay for the 2024 equipment certificates to fund those, and if approved, any park bonds that will be issued as identified in the plan as well. So that is built into that proposed debt levy there. Next line item, building maintenance. The city has identified the city buildings that we own and maintenance that, one, is coming due, or two, that is past due. This is where the city is working on a plan to be more proactive than reactive, where we've identified future needs and setting up a funding success to be able to pay for these items as they come up. So this is a start that process, commit some funding to those maintenance items, with more work to be done in that department as well. EDA, there's a proposed increase of $75,000. This is due to the fact of some new proposed positions that will be presented later on as we go, as some of the positions proposed to affect economic development. So staff deemed it appropriate that the Economic Development Fund would pay for some of those wages. Then the last line item is the Parks and Trails. That's that $500,000 levy that the city that we were just discussing, that was identified in the 10-year plan. So total proposed tax levy is just over $16 million. Next slide just breaks down where the portion of the tax levy is going. The majority of it, about 65%, is going to the general fund. This is just the operation of the cities. It's a major portion of that tax levy. It includes most of the city's labor costs, material and supplies just to operate the city. The capital equipment fund, as we mentioned, identifies all the capital needs for, capital equipment needs that the city has, represents about 6%. Capital improvement fund, that includes all the street maintenance, street reconstructions costs, represents about just under 6%. Debt service is about just under 18%. These are the repayments of debt issuances that the city has, and does include any proposed debt issuances as well. And as you can see down the line, economic development is about 1.4, park dedication is about 3, and building maintenance is a small 0.5% as being proposed. This next slide is just really a visual for the council to see this, a breakdown of where those different tax levy dollars are going and where the big chunks are of the tax levy is going. So when we prepared the 2024 budget, there are a lot of challenges that the city had to consider when putting putting the budget together. Streets, a lot of the things identified in the capital improvement and related to streets were due to road projects that got delayed, pushed out because funding was not committed to complete those projects. So really kicking the can down the road. So the city identified that there's a lot of catch up that needs to be done on street improvements and maintenance. So identifying the best way to fund those while getting the streets in the city up to our standard. Parks, the park master plan identified areas of need from 2016 and also in the draft master plan as mentioned. And a lot of these projects are deferred maintenance, again, equipment, trails, things like that, that are overdue to be replaced. So trying to play catch up and not kick the can down the road, as I said, for parks as well. And as mentioned, city-owned buildings, we need the plan for the future, and the future starts now. There are some deferred items with those buildings that have been overlooked that the city has identified, but also looking forward to make sure that that doesn't happen in the future, that we have funds available and identifying those needs now instead of waiting until they come due. And it's really just weighing the funding options, like mentioned with the capital improvement plans. Do we have cash on hand? Are you going to be issuing debt? Weighing the pros and cons there. With having really limited funding options, there's not a lot of options for cities to fund these type of needs, usually through the tax levy or issuance of debt. More challenges is this, what's been discussed before, is really this economic forces and inflation. We have not seen a decrease in costs, which is no surprise. If anything, the costs have still been going up some too. So trying to build some of those expectations in and how we plan for 2024, moving forward, if those costs are going to hold, are they going to flatten out, and how to best manage those, basically the unknown of those economic forces. Also in the general fund, we're looking at staffing, looking to the future, and sizing our staff appropriately, trying to be proactive and reactive, being proactive rather than reactive. What are the current city needs, but what are the future needs that the city sees in 2 to 3 years that the city can start planning for now, to maybe bring staff on now to help set up for success in those 2 to 3 years, so we're not being reactive and trying to play catch up like we are now. And our initiative is a paid on call fire. In this proposed budget, there is a $4 per hour proposed increase in the paid on call fire wages. This next slide of looking at the general fund expenditures, I feel is it tells a good story and very important. When compiling the numbers for the general fund, these are costs and expenditures that I classify as not being able to control, where it's not any new staff, it's not any new software that maybe could be considered not needed. These are costs that the city needs that are just going up and we have no control over it. Our insurance renewal for the city is every September. So all the proposed premiums for property, liability, auto, and workers' comp is going up $108,000. That's due to a variety of reasons. It's based on claims, it's based on costs of property is going up to replace if something happens. They're seeing, the league for the city insures from is seeing those increases, and that gets passed on to the members. So there's nothing that the city is doing that can necessarily control those costs. We can't control the claims that come in necessarily, so it's really a cost that the city can't control. On the next line item, election services, due to being a presidential election year in 2024 in our JPA with Washington County, that is it. The cost of that budget line item is going up $59,000. Again, nothing the city can do to control that budget line item. The next one, computer support. This is our contract with Metro INET for IT services. Their costs are going up, so the cost gets passed on to member services. There's also some fiber improvements that are in this budget as recommended by IT staff to help improve that as well. Testing services.
Can you provide some more color on just the election services increase? Is this the year we're adding a precinct, or just feels like a lot for one day? And I know there's a lot that goes into it, but
There's an additional, because of the primary, there's an additional election, and so they charge us per precinct, per election cycle or day or whatever.
and is it because 2023 was at 0, so the increase is the full increase? Okay, so it's not,
See this about every 4 years.
it's not 59,000 over what we've done in the past? Okay,
no, it's
it's
just
because it's over 0.
I mean, we could leave it at 59,000 every year or whatever the number is, but, or we do it this way, which is every
Understand.
4th year, you'll see a bump
Okay.
because it's this kind of an election.
Understood.
Assessing services had an increase of about 13,000. That's with our contract with Washington County to provide those assessing services. Electric utilities has seen quite, sorry, accidentally hit a button there, has seen quite a significant increase over the past couple years. We're not seeing that number change or go down. It is still maintaining its level, and in some cases going up in some areas. So this is just to reflect what we're paying now, and nothing is telling us different that those costs are going to be coming back down. So we're planning that those costs are going to hold steady. The same with fuel, looking at the usage and fuel, looking at the price of fuel. As an overall general fund increase of about $26,000. Then repairs and maintenance, this is across all departments in the city's general fund. It's $5,000 in this department, $5,000 in this department, and it's really due to just the cost to maintain vehicles, oil changes, tires, repairs and maintenance. Those costs have gone up. So it's just a reflection of where those costs are trending in '23 and how they're going to relate into 2024. Well, then the grand total of those costs, increase in the general fund budget from those costs alone is just over $400,000. So keep that number in mind. I'll come back to this number as we keep going through the presentation, but just wanted to bring that to council's attention, that pretty significant increase in costs that really we couldn't do anything about. This next slide is when are the proposed positions for the city in 2024. Just note the first bullet there is just to fill the vacant administrator position. The city will be looking at getting this posted sometime in the near future here in September or October to fill that position. A new position, which was discussed at the city council's discussion portion of the meeting, is a zoning and court enforcement officer. Well, this needed for administrative ticketing and enforcement of complaints as previously discussed. Another proposed position is a city engineer. The real benefit that the city sees here is a streamline in the development process and reduce development costs. Right now is very expensive to do costs and do development in the city. It's looking at our process for how long it sometimes takes to get things reviewed and whatnot, and we view having an engineer to complete some of these tasks would be a benefit to the whole development process as a whole, and do reduce some of those costs for development, and also reduces the need for outsourcing some of those costs as well. The next position is a planning and EDA supervisor. This would manage the planning and economic development aspect of the community development department. And then community service officer is being proposed as well. This officer would perform a variety of tasks in the community that would benefit not only the police department as officers, but also would be able to help out with some other departments as well, doing some community servicing needs around the city. Then the last position being proposed is a stormwater technician. There's an increasing need related to stormwater, as previously mentioned with the Surface Water Management Fund, a 10-year plan, with part of that funding coming from the general fund. So this is a position that's needed to help service that area. The next slide looks at the proposed budget for the revenue in the general fund. The purpose of this slide is really to show council the limited funding options that the general fund has. You can see the majority of the funding does come from that property tax levy. We do have revenue coming in from licenses and permits, intergovernmental, some charges for services, but there's limited opportunity there. Those usually stay relatively flat, as you can see from the increase in the dollar increase column. So you can see right now the total budget for the general fund revenue is about 12.6 million. This leads to the next slide. It just summarizes the general fund expenditures by category and what those increases are looking like by those different categories. Expenditures equal the revenue in the general fund, so we're calling for a balanced budget in 2024. This just shows at a high level where the majority of those expenditures are, the proposed increases by function, and that revenues and expenditures in the general fund are proposed to balance. So looking at the proposed general fund increase, I broke it down into 3 different categories, which was a very good exercise and very eye-opening for where we're seeing that increase in expense and related revenue, tax levy in the general fund. The first bullet point is personnel costs, increase of about $415,000. This increase is just current staff. This does not include any of the new proposed positions. This is COLA increases based on union negotiated contracts, step increases, the related fringe benefits, health insurance, city's portion of FICA, PARA, all the other benefits that the city offers. This is an uncontrolled cost. This is what's been negotiated with those union contracts, and that's causing a $415,000 increase in the general. The next bullet point is the 2024 proposed positions, as you were just shown. That is accounting for about $410,000 of the increase in the general fund. So now I'll jump down to the third bullet point. We're going back to that slide a couple slides ago where the uncontrollable costs increased about $400,000. When we look at all the other expenditures outside of wages in the general fund, they is proposed to increase about $445,000, with $400,000 of that being uncontrollable. It's not anything that the city is adding new to streamline processes or staff-wise. It's just increase in cost to operate the city, where it has a nominal increase of $44,000 of those other expenses. So this slide really breaks down the first bullet point, cannot change based on what we currently have. And then the last bullet point is really pretty set too. So it's really when you look at what the increase is in the general fund and what's being proposed as addition is really that second bullet point of the proposed positions. That's where the ask is coming from in the general fund.
Kevin, you had mentioned previously that one of the, kind of reinforced that one of the goals is to continue to enforce the paid-on-call model for our firefighters, and you had talked about that there was a proposed per dollar increase to that paid-on-call model. Is that included in the 2024 personnel costs, like the existing, that's included as one of those planned adjustments?
That's included in the first bullet point, since
First
they
one,
are
yep.
positions.
Okay.
That's a good clarifying question.
Thank you. Other questions to this point?
Well, and with all these challenges of the 2024 budget that we're going over, it was really find the path to fund all the needs that the city has from an operational standpoint, capital equipment standpoint, the improvement side, including streets, buildings, parks, wrapping in all the increases in the utility funds and rates, again, without kicking the can down the road. This plan and budget that has presented for the 10-year plan and what's in the general fund is trying to get the city on a better path moving forward, so we're not doing that. We're trying to dig ourselves out of the hole in some regards to some of these proposed increases while maintaining, while getting us righted and moving forward to be more proactive than reactive. These next slides are just good information, I feel like, for staff and for city council as well as residents. This shows where the tax levy history has been for the city for the past 9 or so years. And keep in mind, this is a total tax levy. This is not just a general fund, this is all the levies that the city has. So you can see the 2024 proposed of just over 16 million is about a 2.9% $2.9 million increase from where it was in 2023. You can view the previous 8 years has been a pretty modest increase for many years. And when you go back to the slide of what the increase is just in personnel costs with current staff being at 400,000, take that rough number and play that into a dollar increase, that's accounting for a large percentage of that dollar increase. So the next question is, what does this levy do, proposed levy do to the city's tax rate? When we're looking at the tax rate on this slide and in the future slides, this is a very preliminary number. There are some numbers that we have a preliminary amount from Washington County for, but there are also estimates built in by myself. But just to give an idea of where we're looking at. So this tax rate number can go up, it can go down. We should have a better number come early September once we get those numbers from Washington County. So you can see from this chart, the 2024 proposed tax rate, preliminary tax rate is just under 40, which you can see starting in about 2018 to current, with taking 2023 out as an outlier out based on the significant increase in values. The city has historically been around that 40% range. But right now, looking at preliminary where the city's at, even with this increase in levy, we're still right at that tax rate of 40%.
I mean, can you just explain what that 40% means? I mean, it's 40% of what?
Okay, next slide. You beat me to it. So this is what that 40% tax rate of this round up to 40 means. The first line item, it's a taxable market value. This plays into it just in that calculation as what are homeowners, what is the taxable market value increase on an average for Forest Lake? And right now, based on preliminary numbers from Washington County, it is 8.55%. So looking at what your taxable market value was in 23, what is it going to be in 24? It's going to increase by 8.5%. That's what that number is telling us. The next section of this slide is the total tax capacity value. What this is what is the taxable value in the city as a whole? about 39.4 million. This is a total amount that the city could theoretically tax. What the tax capacity value is.
And that's dictated by the county?
What's that?
And that's dictated by the county or?
That's a preliminary number from Washington County, yes.
Okay.
So that comes from them. So the column on the left is actual. Those are final numbers. That's where the city came in 2023. The numbers on the right and the proposed, the ones with just the one asterisk, is a preliminary number from Washington County. These numbers will probably change, but in my experience, probably not too significantly. But these numbers won't be this, I can't say won't, but more times than not, they are going to change by some amount. The next number of the 2.2 million, the less FD contribution in value. What FD is fiscal disparities. What that is Minnesota has a program where it takes a metro area and they divvy up some tax revenue based on what type of development's coming in different areas to basically spread that wealth to all surrounding communities. So everyone, because they feel that that's a benefit to all those communities, right? So to come up with that value, we take that value out. This number is determined from Washington County. We don't have that number yet. So right now I plugged in what the value is from last year. There's no better information to go off at this point that I have. We also take out what is a capture value for tax increment. Again, just taking the number that was there for 2023, taking that out to get a net tax capacity value of about 36.7 million. So then from there, we take what is the city levy? What are we proposing for a levy? Where you see that just over 16 million. From that fiscal disparities, the city does get a distribution on but the first half and second half of when we receive our property tax settlements. That's what that dollar amount is. That gets subtracted out of levy because that's dollars that are coming from somewhere else. We're still getting that. So if we're calculating out the tax capacity, that's subtracted out to get down to 14.6 million. So then the 39.986 is the 14.6 million divided by the 36.7 to get that 39.986. Any questions on that before I move on? I know that's a lot to take in, but it's important numbers to look at for how it plays into not only the levy, but what that does for a tax capacity rate and how that also does then play into effect how that affects the city's portion of the tax levy on homes, which is our next slide. So again, these are very preliminary numbers. This is based on what we just went over with the tax levy, what the tax rate is, what the estimated increase is going to be on values of homes. So based on what the home value was in 23 and taking that and increasing it by that 8.55%, taking in what the proposed levy is with the estimated fiscal distributions to get what the preliminary tax rate is. In the first line there with the house valued at $397,000, the estimated page 24 would be $1,447.49. But the dollar change from 23 of about $166, which equates to less than $14 a month. Again, this is preliminary, and this is only the city's portion of the property tax statement. This is not the county's portion, any special districts that are on the statement as well. So just want to make that clear that this is only the increase in that city's portion of the property tax statement.
Do you have any sense what those other taxing authorities might be doing?
We do not. With the proposed levies being due by September 30th, those numbers do become available. Right now, a lot of cities, this is the time where proposed budgets and levies are all being presented. So we should be able to start getting some of that information, but it's really hard to play into what like the county tax and how that's gonna affect the property tax statement, where we can control what we have at our city levy, where looking at what other taxing authorities are doing and how that relates can be difficult. So this slide, just for comparison, and was very useful looking at, this is a list of what the city of Forest Lake considers comparable cities. So where is the city's levy in comparison to other cities that we like to compare ourselves to? So this is for 2023. So when you look, so these are actuals not only for the city of Forest Lake, but where other cities came in at. So you can see, looking at the list and comparables, the city of Forest Lake is on the lower half of the total property tax levy, with looking over at the percent increase also being the lower part of the increase in 2023. Which this leads into a discussion on this good information on this one is, where is the city of Forest Lake with this proposed increase in 2024? So with all the other cities on this list, it's assumed that they're gonna have an 8% tax levy increase overall. Looking at the trend from last year and where cities are going, and when you look at what our, let alone our costs are doing, what our wages are doing, 8% is not a bad starting point. Some are gonna be higher, some are gonna be lower. We don't know that. Every city's needs are different, just like we presented tonight for where they're at with where their needs are. But even so, with this significant increase, we're still middle of the pack, lower half of our comparable cities right now. So it's really useful looking at, it's just good information. And like I said, every city's different, every needs are different, but it is useful just to look at, well, what are other cities' levies at, what are they doing, and where do we kind of compare to those, as it can be a good benchmark for the direction the city is going.
And just to clarify, the other city estimate for 2024 is just an estimate of 8% blanket, not, you haven't made phone calls to colleagues in other cities, no information, it's just really an estimate.
No, I know what some cities are doing, but they haven't been presented yet. So that's where, until they get presented and certified to the county, it's really that's what matters. That's where the hard numbers are. There's a few out there that are coming in and they've had their workshops on it, but not being involved with those discussions. It could have been, well, they proposed it and they went for it, they don't like it. So it's really, to throw that out there is really not useful at this point, where hopefully within the next month or so, we should have some better ideas on where those other cities are coming in at. And that wraps up what I had. I know that was a lot of information to go over rather quickly. If you have any questions for myself that I can answer, or any of the city staff here as it relates to anything in the budget, we'd be happy to answer those.
Couple of questions.
Absolutely, go ahead.
So the debt service percentage you pointed out was 17.87. That's current debt as well as the proposed debt for this coming year. Knowing that there's gonna be more bond issues in the coming years, where do we expect that debt service percentage to grow to as a part of the overall pie?
So included in your documents, and I can pull it up on my screen as well, is a 10-year kind of tax levy projection on where we feel like it's going to go. So I don't have that specific percentage right off the bat, but it's broken down with the top section being current tax levies. So what that is, those are levies that are there right now with the proposed increases, with the bottom half being, these are levies that are projected, estimated to be for future bond issuances. So once bonds get issued with that, they'll go up to the top portion, because once they've been issued, their current bond issue, there's nothing that the city can do or city council can do to change that once it's been issued. It's a very specific amount that's laid out when the debt's issued that the city needs to levy.
Yeah, if you could work that up, that would be great information to have for a future conversation. Just, I mean, debt service at, less than 20%, most households don't feel too uncomfortable
The total levy?
of the total levy. But if we get closer to mid-30s, 40s, and 50, I call that house poor when I'm dealing with my clients that have too much mortgage. I'd just be concerned about locking future councils and staff into a really bad position.
Well, and that's the beauty of the 10-year plan. Every year you need to review it and decide whether that's going to be locked in or not. I mean, each bond issue is independent on its own. So future councils next year, the year after, 10 years from now, have the ability to adjust whatever you decide to adjust. So, but we will get you that. That's a fair.
That's a great question. And to that point, I wonder if that would be helpful to have as a comparison on our benchmark cities of just where are we in
That ratio.
debt ratio compared to our benchmark cities. And I know you're not going to know 2024, but where we sit today, just be helpful of, I believe we've been fairly modest in our use of debt, and just to know what that is compared to our other benchmark cities would.
With working with our financial consultant, Ellers, with our proposed plan, is to keep them up to date with what the city's possibly looking at. We are low. When we look at the amount of debt that the city currently has, he has said that we're low compared to other cities. And that's when we're looking at debt and we're looking at issuing, how can we structure this when the best, is it a 15 years, a 20 years? So when maybe a new bond's coming on in the future, but the old one's falling off. So it's not necessarily adding to the levy, you're just replacing the levy with a new bond because the old one's paid off. So that's where the city is that's where I like to have our debt structured as best as possible. So we don't have this big swing up and swing down. But with the city playing catch up in so many regards to some of these big needs that are out there, it's a lot at once to get there. But that's where just looking at equipment certificates, is it better to have it as a 10-year, 15-year? Well, can we plan it to have it only interest at first, so lower the impact, stretch it out more? These are conversations that once we get to, once we know what's approved and what we can move forward with, is really working with our consultant at that point. What are interest rates doing? Are there any refunding opportunities with our current debt? So it's a constantly moving target of how do we best balance this to not just, well, we need debt, we want to do this now, but looking, just like you said, Councilmember Erickson, we don't want to have the same issue come up 15 years from now, for example, with another council. So that's where, when we look at when it's looked at, I look at it as current, but what's it look like in 15 years for that? Because in 5 years, you're going to have another 10 years, and you know that's going to fall off as this kind of a rolling cycle at that. So, but I can work on summarizing that information for you.
Thank you. I think this budget overall is very well put together. So thank you, Kevin. It's not always a fun topic to talk about, but it's well put together. One other question, I'd just be curious, kind of going back to our original goal of the city, how will these new staff hires improve the service to the community? Can you guys add some color to that?
Yeah, I will. We already talked about the enforcement officer position. We talked about that at the last meeting. I think that will improve the city quite a bit with handling all the complaints that we have regarding yards and neighbor disputes and things like that. So I think that's a really important one. Just got to turn to the other positions. I think the city engineer position, nothing against Bolton, Mank, or Ryan, who do a great job, but we have a lot of small engineering tasks and duties that to be quite honest, shouldn't be paying Bolton and Mank to do. Grading reviews and some small house construction things that they should be able to, but also maybe handling some of the smaller redevelopment I use the Culver's driveway, example. They put a new driveway in. It's a pretty small project. We should be able to handle that internally and not send Bolton Make. Not to replace Bolton Make, we're gonna need probably forever for the streets and the larger projects, but we think that we can save money by doing some of that internally, but also some of the very small development stuff that we can start to look at to speed up some of the development processes or the zoning reviews and things like that processes. So it's really kind of a two-pronged attack on that one. And I said engineer already. I'm blanking on what, oh, here we are.
The EDA supervisor?
EDA, okay, sorry, thank you. No, I have that. Okay, yeah, sorry about that. The planning and EDA supervisor, we need more help in planning. We need more help in EDA. We have a community development director who is pulled in many directions, probably too many directions just for community development. Would like to use the community development director in more ways than community development. I think there's more administrative tasks and things and some succession planning that you should think about. So we want to use it that way, but we need to plug in the backside of that. So if we start to direct efforts outside of planning and community development, we need to have somebody fill in those. And we don't do a great job with EDA. I think one of the EDA's tasks should be really where we want to go and what we want to do. We thought when we put the community development director that they would have more EDA responsibility, which yes, they do, but turns out there's a lot of needs and a lot of direction and a lot of fixing to do that didn't do good jobs at. I mean, I think I've said that to the council before. We didn't really do a great job in planning and zoning. And we're still trying to make that catch up. So instead of paying attention to EDA as much as we should, the community development department is trying to fix our processes, eventually our zoning codes and things like that. We're going to need more support there if we're going to move forward, particularly if development continue, what we think might happen with development happens. So, community service officer, we've talked a long time about the community service officer. This was in the police staffing plan that was done, what's 2016, 17, something like that. Called for a community service officer. We haven't been able to do that. We've added an officer or two, I believe, in the meantime. What this does, it takes the police officer off those small calls that they really don't need to respond to and pay attention to what they should be paying attention to. So things like damage to property or gas station drive-offs or, water complaints by my neighbor or things like that that we're having police officers respond to, very small things. There's a whole bevy of things that they can do. So instead of hiring another police officer, community service officers are less expensive. And in the long run, we probably need either one or two more of these. This is just a start. I think it's a 32-hour position. So just to get started on some of this, in the future, over the next 10 years, you should probably look at adding at least one or two more. Maybe having, one in the morning, one at the evening. So not overnights, but just during the 7 to 11 p.m. shifts. And finally, stormwater. Well, we get more and more stormwater ponds every time. We have a lot of maintenance that we have to do on those. We need to keep up with those challenges. That is cleaning, street sweeping, and doing all the things. We're starting to have difficulty keeping up on all those. And that's why we funded this out of stormwater with a 25% into the general fund for just funding mechanism. So I think they're pretty necessary. I don't know if they're exactly in priority order, but they're pretty close to priority order. But I think they're all, we wouldn't ask for them if they're not important. These are all important. We have been understaffed for, well, since I have been here, I think we've been understaffed since 2014 when they pretty much decimated the staff here, decimated community development. And we're just catching up, and we've grown at least 1,500 units, residential units. We're adding more streets. We're adding, there are more demands out there. The public is more demanding than they've ever had been. You ask the police and fire chief about how many calls they're getting and what kind of calls they're getting. More and more every day, we're getting more demands, and that's people coming in with plans for, fences, swimming pools. That's people coming in for animal complaints, my neighbor complaints. I mean, it's all over the board. So we're trying to, if I really had the guts to do it, I'd probably have 5 more positions on this place. But, I'm realistic in that I can't put the city in the position to, get criticized because we need to staff to where we're at, but these are important positions that need to happen.
Thank you.
Are there other questions?
Just looking at some of these increases in, on these different departments, so administration, an increase of 346,000, and we're actually, are we in that, I know we need to replace a position, but we're not, are we adding a position? Is that
No.
what's the biggest increase on that, 300, just administration?
Let me get,
So the administration increase, a big portion of that is 108,000 of insurance in there. And then the rest is mostly wages and benefits in there. There is no new positions that are included in the administration category.
And then on community development as well, like, so,
that's the positions. We have 2 positions if we do the community development and the ADA, which is split, and some of that's split into EDA, as we mentioned, but the other one is the enforcement officer. And then it's basically salaries and benefits.
The enforcement officers under the community development umbrella?
Yes, and just for the, I know you've seen this, but up at your desk is a line item of major changes memo that explains some of this. So, but yeah, that's the big thing is the zoning enforcement, planning, EDA supervisor. And again, some of that's been shifted to EDA, so.
and overall, I mean, a lot of work went into this, and I appreciate Kevin and staff. Could you go back to that 10-year plan where it talks about the percentage increase, that slide?
Levy?
With the levy, yeah, I guess that's where it would be. It was,
This one?
no, it was a 10-year, it laid out the 10-year of each increase, 21% this year, and then,
This one.
yes, and then it softens up. We got 15, but then 7. I'm a little, I know we need to spend the money to do some of these things, but I'm a little concerned in that big of an increase, especially right now with how inflation is for the average family. It's just, it's out of control, and any opportunity to push that, this isn't really, it is kicking the can, but not so much, but let's 2028, inflation could be less. It's just right now, families are struggling with this, with inflation and rates, and so it'd be nice to push that all out a little bit. I know that's the 10-year plan, but you mentioned that 10-year plan is made to, it's a living, breathing document that we can revisit each year. I think that's a pretty high number just for the general resident. And then the fact that if you look back at the previous couple years of increase of 800,000, maybe 500,000, and now all of a sudden we're going to a $2.1 million increase, that's startling for most people, I think, to see that. And so I don't know how you address that with.
What would you pull off or?
Well, I think the better question, not the better question, is what would you pull off, but also what should it be? Where are you comfortable at? Is it 20%? Is it 5%? Is it 15%? I mean, what's the whole council's feeling about where that number should be, not only for 24, but then we have to, that will impact where it goes out in the rest of the plan. So what's the comfortable number? I mean, we can talk about cutting proposed positions or reducing, but the real thing is that if you're uncomfortable with a 22.5% increase, which I understand, I mean, I get it, what's the number? That's the discussion I think the council has to have.
The squirm factor is high for sure. I don't want to, I don't know if you had some thoughts on items to come off. You know, maybe to step back a little bit, because there's a lot coming into this budget that has, some items are repeat performers. I've, you know, been on this council for many years, and I think, you know, proposal for code enforcement and proposal for community service officers have been on the request list for many years and have not been funded. So we have those kind of repeat performers, but we also have some new requests. And as I reflect on what's been done around the 10-year plan this year that previously hadn't been done, was more thorough evaluation specifically on streets of kind of making sure that we've got not just projects identified for the future, but actually some more scoping done. So I feel like we're better prepared from a street plan perspective. And then also parks. And, you know, previous versions of the 10-year plan did not have parks included. And so we've asked staff of, okay, we need to include it. We have to bring parks into our full city plan. And in doing so, staff's made the recommendation of, gosh, if you want to do what you said you wanted to do, you need to increase from $50,000 a year, which was last year, to $500,000, repeating every year. And I appreciate that recommendation of, if we want to do what we say we want to do with parks, that's the number to fund. And so let's not forget that. I also, from a pragmatic standpoint, step back of, does that have to, do all of these things have to happen this year? And I would, if we're uncomfortable with an increase of 22%, I would put that as one of the areas that I could see us stepping back, because sometimes these things take multiple years to fully mature, work their way through. That is an area where it's challenging, because the community continues to tell us that they value parks and they want that funding. However, to bridge that gap all in 1 year might be a stretch beyond what we're comfortable with. And so that is one of the areas that comes to my mind to me sooner rather than some others on the list of maybe that's not the year, but it's one perspective.
I would tend to agree on the park piece of it. When we're going from 50 to 500,000, that's and not saying that we don't need it, but that's a pretty big jump in 1 year. And to continue that going forward.
I also think part of this conversation is just the realization of what our rate has been and what that has supported, and then reflect on that to what the rate needs to be to fully fund what we've identified is in the 10-year plan. And I think it's just a healthy discussion for us as council, with staff, and with the public to recognize, no, we don't have to do everything all at once, but if we are, again, wanting to do what plans say, we now know what that cost is. And I appreciate the work that went into the 10-year plan to at least identify that, so that then we can step back and look at it from what's our appetite to fund, how are we staying in line with neighboring communities, our overall goals. This is really, I feel like, the first year where we've had a full 10-year plan that includes parks and streets, and things like maintenance of this building and things that we have known were hanging out there but weren't fully identified and didn't have a funding plan previous. So
Just a couple follow-up questions. So that capital improvement bump from 200 to 950, what is the other 750 getting us? What are we paving?
I'm sure we don't have the capital, we don't have the full capital, but I'm sure it's additional street paving. And it puts the capital improvement fund on a solid basis that if we don't go negative into the cash, but we can answer that next time.
So part of that is just starting to build that war chest, dude.
Well, you have to, you don't want any of your funds go negative. You want fund balance to always be positive and healthy positive as you can. I mean, obviously, for example, the general fund has a 50% fund balance policy, which is important because the way we get our tax revenues. we can look and we can bring, and since we don't have it here in front of us, we can bring back to you what that increase does, why we have it. And that's again, going back to the capital plan and the 10-year plan with it and going over at the next time we talk about the budget.
I have a more minutia question, but in the weeds, but I wanted to make sure we get it asked because it relates to staffing. Can we talk through, so I recognize the staff's recommendation of hiring a city engineer to supplement the work that's done by Bolton and Mink. Talk what the budget impact is for chargebacks for that work. What is the expected chargeback? Is it budget including
budget's
any
been
planned
reduced by-
chargebacks for projects? And
The engineering budget in general fund's gone down about $15,000. We don't know yet what the chargeback will be and how much. Part of that has to do with the market for engineers and what we can get. Is it going to end up being an engineer tech? Will it be a full engineer? That's the struggle that we're having with how much we can charge back. I know that there is ability, as we do that with Bolton and Mink, to charge back some of those development costs, but we can't identify that at this point.
it's planned, fully funded. There's no planned
Again,
chargeback rate.
$15,000, but it's
Okay.
really, there's no revenue associated, and that's where you would see, or you would see a reduction in the cost, but no. We really don't know until we know what the market is and who we can hire and what level of engineer we can hire.
Understood. Okay. Other thoughts, points of
So the
feedback?
question was asked, what's the number the council's comfortable with? Number in mind?
Well, I'm just looking at that 2024 proposed budget. So, I mean, the general fund, I think the only thing, could we leave that up?
I'm sorry?
For that budget that was just on the screen? So the general fund, I guess, I got it here, it's 10.5, and it sounds like about 400,000 of that is, call it negotiable from a standpoint of it's 5 new positions. So that a person could play with. Park dedication fund, we could potentially, reduce that and see what the impact would be in future years. But I think you go down the equipment certificate, well, then also the capital improvement fund, want to keep kicking the can down the road on roads. But then the equipment certificates, I mean, those are kind of locked in, aren't they? I mean, that's the equipment that we've identified, so that's like kind of we got to stick with that. And then the park improvement bonds, is that the bonds for belts, or what is that?
Belts and deferred maintenance projects, yes.
So we're looking to issue bonds for some of that deferred maintenance and bump,
Finish the belts,
what's that?
finishing belts, yes.
No, but I mean, we're looking at issuing those bonds, which would be
And-
137,000
Right.
plus the 500,000 for parks and
Correct.
trails. Okay, got it.
And I guess when we talk about a number, you don't have to do the math. Most of you guys usually want to know what that percentage number is, right? That's what everybody kind of, instead of looking at the number and the increase, everybody kind of gloms onto the percentage number, which is really kind of a misnomer, in my opinion. It's really dollar amount, and you should be looking at dollars instead of percentages or impact on household tax bills. So question is, give us at least a range. If you can't come up, you're not going to be able to come up with a number. Give us a range of what that looks like. And we'll see what we can do, but some of it may be a little more painful than we'd like, but is it 18%, 19%? What is it?
Just support that conversation. Kevin, do you mind flipping over to, you've put together great materials when we keep referring to them. So this is just a compliment on the good materials you put together. So thank you. Could you flip to the slide that has 2023 and the city comparisons on where we were compared to our peer cities? So as we passed our budget last year, I think the question was asked, is it enough and have we gone far enough? And last year when we passed that budget, we didn't have all of these numbers in front of us. There was a lot of information on the 10-year plan that we weren't there yet. And however, surrounding communities White Bear Lake, 23%, Ramsey, 19%. There's a lot of big numbers on here. Now, I still argue that until you know what those dollars are, you don't just raise because everyone else is raising and you feel like you're going to need more money. If we're going to, I believe, if we're going to pass a number, you need to be able to specifically point to the projects that are in place, ready to go. You have to have done the work. And I feel like we're much closer this year to have done the work. I think there are areas like the park plan that could use some additional refinement. But I kind of look at what is our comfort level. City of, Hugo had 14% last year. This might be our year where this is where we've had to take the jump that many other municipalities in previous years have taken. Again, not that we need to follow just to follow, but it's more of an indication of they have the same situation with streets, same situation with staffing, cost of inflation. I feel like this is our year to make an adjustment because, again, us continuing to kick the can down the road and not fund, we now know what those costs are. And so to not address it, I think, is not doing our job. I would love to see this number come in below 20. I think, again, you have to not shock the public of what they're anticipating. Looking for a comfort level range, the 18%. I feel like if I'm supporting a number under 15%, I'm not doing my job because I can now point to those projects that are needed, streets, staffing, things that are needed to do what we've said we wanted to do in Forest Lake.
And I know it's going to be difficult for the public to understand a number like that. And I know that social media will probably hang us from the highest rafter they can find. But you have to remember the Forest Lake way was always to keep the levy the lowest it possibly can be. And now what we're trying to get to is you're making up for past sins. We have to pave streets. We have to fix our parks. We have to keep our equipment, else it's going to keep getting more expensive year after year after year, and your infrastructure is not going to be as the public wants it. If you go back to the strategic plan, which was one of the first slides that Kevin put in, number one was infrastructure and a financial plan. Number two was parks and trails. That's what the public said. That's what the meetings were all about, and that's came up number one and number two. And yeah, it took us a few years to get here, but now we're here, and we know that it's a big task, and we know we were very sensitive in putting this budget together as much as possible, knowing the kind of heat that you are going to get, and the city as a whole, the staff has realized that as well. But we have to present this. We have to give this truth document to you, basically, and then if there's adjustments you feel we need to make, that's fine. We'll work with you to do that. It's just we need a little bit of guidance on what that's going to be.
I'm as big a fan as anybody to keep taxes low, but at the same time, it's kind of like pay me now or pay me later. I mean, I've got clients that haven't saved and they're in their 50s, and the amount they have to save each month is astronomical compared to my 30-year-old clients. And so we're in our 50s now, and we have to pay. What surprised me looking at this is really, even if everything we're talking about, and I'm not really excited about a tax levy north of 20%, but we're talking about the cost of Netflix on the impact on the family budget. And that's actually pretty modest considering all that we're contemplating doing.
The other part that, to piggyback on that, the other part that I was surprised at is our tax rate is still pretty modest, right? So we've taken a big, percentage-wise over last year, there's a significant jump, but that tax rate is still pretty modest. And again, back to our comparison cities, we're still really comparable. One thing I would make know is we're starting to throw around some numbers, and I think as it relates to the 10-year plan, I can't point to things that are in at least the next 5 years of things that are just absolutely not needed. And so if we are making a request to make this 20 to 24 increase something less, I do also think, though, that that probably means that the 2025 number currently proposed for 6.6% might be closer to 10.
It will adjust all the way out the rest of the years.
So again, I think this is where, if we're asking for less, we need to say, okay, is that a, no, we're not ever going to do it, and it needs to come off entirely, because that's a different message? Or is it a timing difference, and are we looking for, is it more of smoothing out? Because we,
Well, and that's the good part about this levy impact list, that it shows you what's coming and how it kind of plays out based on everything we know today. Yes, if we fool around with this year's levy and it goes to 19%, 24 through 23, 25 through 33 will change, but at least you know where the changes are. And this is as smooth as, I mean, if you look at this chart, beyond the 26 proposal, which has to do with building a public works building, you're back to some pretty modest increases percentage-wise. But again, if we fiddle with this year, we will have to adjust and change the rest of the years to compensate, because the needs aren't going to change.
when you presented this first round of the 10-year plan, kind of everything baked, we saw it in layers, then we saw it everything baked in. There was option 1 and option 2. I wonder if you could put together a couple of different options that would kind of show us impact, and if we were to say, seems like there's a more consensus around and 15 to 18%, a couple of different options to get us down there. Because I think, like everything, the devil's going to be in the details, and to just see, there's a lot of inputs here and there's a lot of impact on future large projects. And so just with that guidance, to just see a couple of recommendations. It might be project timing, it might be parks, it might be some of these specific operating positions we've been talking about.
Sure.
It'd be good to at least see a couple of different options so we can start to kind of weigh impact.
Well, and let me ask you a couple of questions. So we can give you options. Do you want to have an adjusted number before September or after September? Want to have more discussion? I mean, okay, so we make a 22.5% preliminary levy. We've already told you that's the highest it's ever going to go, but the goal is to get us under, somebody said 20%. Do you want to do that before we do the preliminary levy? Will we be able to have those discussions, or do you want to work through the rest of the year to see till we get to October, November, and really kind of flesh all of this out? I mean, we can do the speedy way, or we can do a little bit longer way.
I think at least seeing some options penciled out helps us to decide, do we pass a preliminary levy at the current rate, or does it need to be increased? I think, for me personally, it depends on what those options are. And if I look at the list and I'm like, these really aren't great, then I might have a broader appetite.
Because my thought is probably if we have an adjustment before the preliminary levy, we're probably not going to make any really big adjustment after the preliminary levy. It's going to pretty much be locked into what you say. I don't, if we come up with a solution that says, here's your 18%, and you say, okay, that's a preliminary levy, I don't see much scenarios to get it further down. That's all. I mean, we can, but that's kind of a technical, really not that important of an issue, but.
What I'm hearing you say is there's only so many combinations to get us where we need to go.
We'll come up with a couple, 2 or maybe 3 if we can, but once we give you those, I don't know if there's any more options out there once we give you those.
I think with this budget, this preliminary levy, I mean, it's essentially telling us what it's going to cost if we wanted to do everything that the public has told us they want us to do. I don't see the harm in setting it there.
I agree. I just want to point out that, like what you said earlier, I agree with. I think 22% is really hard to digest. Getting it beneath 20%, I think, would be preferable. But with what the public has asked of us, that would be the highest that we want, and we can always go down. And historically, we have gone down. I don't know what the percentage is that we have gone down from where it started to where we've ended, but I remember it has gone down every single year. And one thing that would be difficult for me is decreasing significantly the park dedication fund because the public has requested that. We know what happened last year with the Parks Board. We passed new ordinance for the Parks Board, and I think we all know where we want to go with parks. I would be fine to decrease it, but again, not significantly, because I think with it being the top two requests from the public, I think we need to show them that it's a priority of ours as well.
But we'll definitely come up with some scenarios.
don't, as far as the park piece of it, I think that's probably where, in my opinion, we probably should have had someone a board replaced by now. Because do we really know the public wants that? We hear a few people say we want it, but is that the overall majority of people? Like, do we want to increase that to $500,000? I mean, that is a big number. And I think, yes, we need to invest in the parks. We've delayed that, but that's a big number when we're weighing that out as opposed to needed staff.
Yeah, the number is big, there's no doubt. But that number, it keeps the park dedication fund in a place where we can keep up with replacements and equipment and things like that. And even though we don't have a park board, we know that part of the reason we don't have a park board was funding,
Frustration of funding.
frustration, but also, again, we go back to the strategic plan where that was number two of 4 items that the public in those meetings said. So yeah, we will look at the park fund and see how that plays out. But in our professional opinion, our financial opinion, you need that level over 10 years to just maintain your parks. But again, scenarios will be out there. We'll take a look and see what we can come up with.
I think too, to add on to the park discussion, I think Belts is a great example of a park that people love and enjoy, but wasn't kept up on. And then also we can look at Fenway. There's conversations around that and that growing. And then just the maintenance of all the parks. And there was a visual that we received, I don't remember when, but it was a visual that went back to 2013, I believe. And it showed how many parks were added in the city since 2013. And it was,
Still is 0, I believe.
yes, which is for the amount the city has grown from 2013 to now, and we've had 0 parks, that's crazy.
There's a lot of wonderful information in the back of your annual financial report. It's called the statistical section. I would recommend that reference as far as park and staffing and things go.
You know, back to the question around percentage, what to, if we were to make an adjustment, when do we do that? Do we do that prior to September or after? I do think you have the conversation, right? We need to hear from the public their thoughts. We need to kind of understand of the priorities, what are priorities, and us making an adjustment and holding something back prior to that, I think kind of decreases the conversation. The impact, anything over 15% is going to be seen as a big number, 15% to 22%. I'd rather have the conversation about the whole 22 than us do some adjustment to say, oh, it's just 18. I think it's a big conversation to be had, and let's have it based off of what we currently proposed, knowing that as a council, it seems like we have an appetite for something that's in the mid-teens.
Right, and I know the 22.5% is a big number, but to the point that was made earlier, 2 points that are made. Inflation is taking its toll not only on the households but the city, but it's only a Netflix kind of, and I don't mean to trivialize it, but it's not, for what we're at, what we propose, the impact isn't that great, but I understand the burden on the households, and that's the balancing act we're all trying to figure out here.
I think the question was asked about finding out what the school district and what that's gonna do, because this is,
Yeah, we,
they, we can see this number, but people just see the bottom line on their statement.
Right, it's
They don't go to
cumulative.
breakdown and say the school's this and state, like, they just,
Yeah.
and we're the easy ones to, and rightfully so, we should be the ones that they approach and have issues with it, so.
yeah, we won't know that until sometime in September when they have to come close to their levies. We won't know the county or the school district impact. Again, it's fair, absolutely, people, when they look at the tax bill, don't always look and see that the city has been more responsive and the county's been bad, or the school's been bad, or the city's been good, and so, yeah, no, I think sometime closer probably to that date that we have to pass the preliminary levy, we will, at least by that, somewhere by there, we'll know pretty much what the two major other districts are doing. We just have to wait. We have no idea what they're doing until they present their budget. And that should be, we're in August. After Labor Day, we'll start to see those leak out a little bit.
Another, when we talk about the average cost on a $400,000 house, I mean, the commercial properties, the small businesses, they're ones that are gonna really take the hit on this thing, and so that we have to keep in mind. It can't just be after that $400,000 house and it's a Netflix, expense a month. I think the bigger picture has to be looking. So with that said, I really would have wouldn't support anything north of 20% increase this year.
See what we can do.
Can we just, before we wrap up this topic, can we just revisit next? Kevin, the very beginning of your presentation, I think, had an outline of calendar. Are we expecting a walkthrough plan discussion between now?
We will, if we have discussion between now and the 18th, it will be it will not be a next council meeting. We won't be ready for that. We may have some ability to give you a preview on the 11th.
Could we at least plan for whatever's ready on the
Yeah.
11th, at least
So-
an update?
We'll try to come up, and then we can talk more about the 18th.
Okay.
And just for, the downtown plan still sits out there. Any improvements that we anticipate out there, it's still there. And again, we have no other way to fund that unless we do a major TIFs, or we can't do sales tax for 2 years, or some other revenue or property tax comes in. So just know that we're getting through the real hard part, but then eventually the EDA and we have to talk about the downtown plan and what's really achievable there.
Okay, should we transition to next topic?
Yep.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Last week, we've got some items that I believe the council needs to go through and decide, or at least give us some direction on these 13 items. Some of them we've talked about before. Some of them we are maybe new. But I think we should go through these, and at least we need some direction on what to do, especially in light of a 22.5% property tax increase. How many, if any, or all, do you want us to take on? Some of them, seem pretty simple and straightforward. But if you guys can discuss these items and kind of give us an idea, interest or no interest, yes or no, what we do, can we give you estimates, just what you want us to do with these?
Maybe, so for each of these,
And clarification, I mean, for example, if we go number 1, snow removal for downtown, we've talked about this. Okay, so how much do you want us to pursue this? We believe there's 2 ways to do this. There is contracting with somebody to do this. After a snowfall, we have to determine, is it 2 inches, is it 3 inches, is it twice a day, or is it what the pattern of practice will be there? Or do we rely on that wonderful new code enforcement position you're all going to hire and try to get this done through compliance? So what kind of information do you need for this particular item is the question.
Thoughts?
Well, I mean, working downtown, I know that there's some businesses that take care of it very quickly, and there's others that are quite delinquent. I think past conversations have been around, having a contractor set up that if there's not compliance within X amount of time, it's billed back to those offenders. I mean, that's one route. It'd be curious to know, I mean, to Blake's point in past conversations, I mean, the sweeper's already down there because it's hitting trails in the area. I mean, what's the real cost of swinging through downtown to hit that as a part of the normal course of work that they're already nearby? That's, I think any effort the city might make to hit that after a snowfall like they do with the other trails is going to be a vast improvement to the citizens, the experience. And if the local business owners have to come behind because another half inch has fallen, I mean, that's, just be grateful for the 3 or 4 inches that have been removed already. I mean, they're already there.
With the potential of the code enforcement person, if that actually someone is in place, I think obviously we have a better chance of it being followed. So really for me, with that, taking that out would be more the priority on the removing the berms and on a more timely matter, because that it's problematic for elderly people or anyone in that fact trying to get over to the sidewalk. And also when that gets large enough, you're pushed out and those cars are a quarter of the way into the lane on 61. So it's a safety thing and a convenience thing for the public and for the businesses that have there, and they only have nowhere to push the snow but out into that certain area, so easier, business friendly to be able to access businesses basically.
So the berms are more important kind of than the streets would be.
Well, that was, after, with this idea of a code enforcement person, I think hopefully we could, to Leif's point, get that achieved by that.
So we're looking
would
more at
agree.
enforcement, hiring a contractor or code enforcement to shovel and clean and bill back or something along those lines.
Yes, I think we're seeing heads nodding.
Okay.
Point to
And-
code enforcement for snow removal, code enforcement / billbacks.
All right, and the berms are just basically removing those berms after the state has come and plowed and how many hours it's going to take and when it's going to place and what overtime is or whatever the structure is.
Dave, that's done occasionally today, is that right? And this would be, so the request would be that would be done more frequently? Because
Yeah,
we're
we'd have to-
supplementing what MinDOT does, is that?
Yep, so when we are gonna do it, we have to contact MinDOT 48 hours before we plan on doing it. And then they can decide whether or not they supply trucks or equipment to cut the cost down. So they've never supplied anything, but we still have to give them that phone call. So increasing is fine, but I think putting a restriction on the 48 hours is tough, because if it snows on Thursday afternoon, then you're gonna pay a whole bunch of guys a lot of overtime to come in on a Sunday morning after 48 hours happens. So I think gotta be some wiggle room in that where it's close as we can. And we schedule now so they come in overnights on like a Friday, so they don't screw their week up. If you come in on a Tuesday morning at midnight, now their turnaround is, now they worked the night, now they gotta come back the next day, and it's wonky. And it depends on if snow's in the schedule. You don't want to clear snow and have to come in and plow right away. So it's a mixture of things. I mean, I think the goal can be to remove it more times and not let the piles get as big. I think it's difficult to put a requirement on X amount of inches and X amount of time, because there's way too many variable factors that are going on. I think that's doable, just, us increasing that or making that a goal to increase that, but it's tough to put a restriction on that actual time and depth.
Seems reasonable.
We do get reimbursed through MinDOT too, so if we do increase it, they pay us back for the clearing and not the hauling out. So like the equipment that the loaders and the skid steers and stuff that we can charge them back equipment time. Some of that cost, and we don't get it all back, but
Seems
Okay.
reasonable.
Good. I think we've also talked about enhanced street and sidewalk sweeping.
We're talking
downtown.
summertime.
I don't know how much often we do that, but how often are we talking about? Is it a weekly thing or?
Well, are you doing it currently or is that the state?
no. So the only time we do downtown is the 4th of July, then we do it every morning, that whole weekend from the, it's until the 5th. We sweep downtown and along Broadway, it's around the parade, but otherwise we don't touch it.
And then, I'm sorry, most streets, you say are hit once a month throughout the city? I mean,
Yep.
so maybe once a month, it would be addition, just anything enhanced to what the state's doing, because right now, you go through there and like you work down, like you said, it's just kind of nasty. It just needs to be done a little more. And obviously the state's not going to do it anymore if we ask them to.
Yeah, I don't think they got down there to do anything until just before the 4th of July. And that was because you called them. I mean, it looked terrible for all spring and into the summer. You're going to do it once in the spring to get that initial nastiness from winter out of there. I mean, I would think that the watershed district would be excited about that. I mean, we clean every road so often, and the ones that are closest to the lake just sit there with all that junk in the berms.
Yeah, they just understand how that goes too, is, you're cleaning somebody else's road. So that's the whole,
But it's our downtown.
Do we get reimbursed for that, similar to snow removal, berm removal? No?
no. Yeah, we'd have to work through that too. I don't think it'd be as big with the county, but at state, just have to make sure we have a revolving right-of-way permit with Washington County to be on their road to do maintenance. But MnDOT, we do not have a revolving one, so we'd have to do some type of a permit to be out there. Kind of a liability deal, it's not their equipment doing stuff on there, because we have insurance for when we clear the roads out, or the snow in the winter. So we'd have to do a whole nother kind of agreement with that.
To the point of, great partnership with Watershed District on city streets, and that's been great. Is there some opportunity for some funds recoup through the Watershed District if we were to also take on 61 or add to our mileage? Because, I mean, there is a, water clarity benefit there. I don't know if that's been part of the conversation with Watershed District. I know you
61
can't speak for them, but.
Well, 61 up until right until you get downtown, there's no curb, so there's not that much benefit to sweeping all of 61 until you get to the curb section. That's what you're grabbing before it goes in the catch basin. Otherwise, it's, the center medians and the ditches, which do a lot of the filtering for you. I can talk to them, but I mean, we can add it on. I mean, we can add it to our spring sweep and then see how it goes if we need to increase that.
Yeah, I don't even think it's, I mean, need more than once. I mean, just get that initial winter sand and salt out of there. I think would really improve everything for the citizens who are down there all the time.
We'll have to contact the state. See.
Yeah, I can talk to the county public works and then our contacts at the state and see, and maybe there is some type of a cost share agreement where they don't have to drive their sweeper up here to sweep the county road or the state road, and we might get going back like we do with the roads. We've never explored that, but it's something we can look into.
That'd be awesome.
Okay, I think we'll combine 4 and 5 if we can. It's basically kind of the same thing, remulching or rocking common areas downtown and along Broadway, and weed control. I don't know how much of that is ours versus counties versus states.
It's all ours to maintain.
Can we maybe talk through what current plan would be? No direction given to do anything different than 2024 than 2023. Can we just kind of talk about level set on what current?
What do we do
Yeah,
now?
what the current situation is.
Currently, it's set up for weed control with the kids, you know, every couple weeks. The mulch and the dirt is so bad in there that it doesn't work. I mean, it's due for a complete redo at some point. We can't even, I mean, we really can't even remulch most of it because it's over the top of the curbs already.
I feel like that's the broader need, and I'm not sure if it's a this year or how that fits in, but I feel like weed control and the mulch is needed because just the aging of that landscaping is just aged out. Do we have, is there a plan for replacement?
We don't, it's not in the parks plan. We have a dollar amount for what it's gonna cost to redo it all, but it's not in the park
Updated
CLP
plan.
or the streets, or it's not in the budget at all.
Get you that number.
Yeah, and some of these, like, well, I provided this list, a lot of it is public works stuff and aesthetics. But what's interesting is there's only, you know, there's $194,000 increase for public works. I mean, out of all these asks and how big this budget is, when everything we're asking public works to do, that seems like a pretty small number. Lots of overall on public works, and because that's where most of this falls on. And I think that it's aesthetically, people want to be places that are clean, neat, and this is just the little stuff. I know it all adds up that makes people proud of their town, especially their downtown. And all minimal stuff that really, I think most cities are doing.
Okay, we'll get you a number of what that is, and because we have to redo the whole, have to tear it all out and put it back in, so. Number 6 is repainting of the streetlights, which I think we do already, right? Every other year, or?
We have $25,000 in the streetlight fund that revolves every 4 years. We paint traffic lights and streetlights. This year, we did not do anything because of the electric utility spiking, as Kevin kind of showed you, that we have to adjust for in '24. So we did not do it to try to level that out, so that doesn't really blow the budget on there. But in the last 4 years, we've painted all the light poles and all the traffic lights, so they should up around. We'll include the fencing and all that stuff. So it's kind of already baked into the budget to do that.
Yeah, the fencing, one thing with fencing on 11th as well, or County Road 30, you know, that over the bridge is
Yep.
pretty.
Yeah, there's a bunch on Broadway too that didn't get hit the first round through. Going forward, like even the streetlights, we won't have to paint all the way to the top. It'll be, you know, the first 10 feet are up to that second color, which gets nailed by the salt. So, you know, that'll reduce that cost, and you can expand it to fencing. So baked in, and it just kind of goes on. Like I said, this year we would have done more, but we just didn't want to blow the budget on that because we knew we were going to be over budget on that, just with the utilities itself.
But with that increased utility budget for 2024, thought is you're back to that ordinary routine in
That
2024.
budget number was increased to kind of reflect what happened in '22. It's that whole hurricane and all that stuff that happened last year when all the prices jacked up, it wasn't budgeted for, and then we didn't know that was gonna happen, so our '23 budget was lower than one that was gonna spike, then that would have been different. Sometimes it's really difficult to plan for the next year in August of the year before. I don't know if you know that or not, but it's quite difficult.
7 is replacement of city banners as needed. I believe we do replace banners.
Yeah, there was a discussion about replacing them. Came up with a price of about $10,000 to replace them all, brackets and banners. Dan's no longer here, but Dan was gonna talk to the EDA about possibly changing the design, maybe going to triangles or doing something different, or some different theme on there. Here was, if you replace all the banners with the same banners, or anybody gonna notice that you replace the banners? You know, and on it, you might wanna have them look a little different. So that can be a thought, or we can just replace all. Right now, as we just go as they break, or we have a stack of them at the shop and we just replace them as they.
You do have extra on hand to replace.
Yeah, we go through probably, I don't know, maybe a dozen a year. And then they get all brittle and break off, but, so all of them have probably been replaced 2 or 3 times already. Just
Well, maybe that could be an EDA, since that was, the
Yeah.
originally did the project, it was
We'll,
that.
we'll set it on the EDA's agenda for banners and
In the past, the Rotary and Lions have contributed to that. as
Yep,
well, so.
Gary Lee from the Lions had reached out to me too and asked me about the same thing and said the Lions are very interested in partnering.
Excellent.
Number 8's looking into raising the dam on First Lake. I believe this has to do with current water levels are low. That's about all I know, so, I mean,
Well, just, it got, the Lake Association started talking about, this is a conversation that's been going on for probably 100 years, this, the level of the lake. And so with this, we had all that extra water this spring, and to lose that and then come into the situation where we are now, I guess it's probably not so much a budget thing, it would be more just to set something up with the Lake Association and Watershed District to see what that possibility is. It would have to be a mechanical dam, I don't know where the funding would come from that, but I don't know if there's any, if there was any money needed to at least not do a study, but to have that conversation. I think the residents would appreciate that greatly.
I mean, we can have the conversation. I know that when it comes to dams, that usually in Minnesota, even Wisconsin, the DNR sets those high water marks or the height of the dam. So we'll have to talk to them as well, if there's anything that we're going to do with that, because they're the ones that really control that. So
Follow-up is
with the water,
at least a call.
yeah, DNR, water, and Lake Association. Number 9 is to fully or partially fund the expense to tear down the old theater building on Lake Street. We know it doesn't look good. Depends how you want to, what you want to do with this one.
Thoughts?
We don't own the building, so.
This one's a tough one for me because it's not owned by the city and there's not a project proposal from the applicant. So hard to, I think
Getting
the
it down was-
downtown plan contemplates a whole number of scenarios. Hard to talk specific projects without, I need to better understand what the wishes are of the property owner and what the ask of the city might be.
And I have no idea what it will cost to tear that building down.
I think,
How much we would do and how much the owner would do, or if the owner's willing. I'm sure he probably would be. If I were the owner, I would, but.
well, I don't know if we could somehow re-engage conversation with them. Maybe there was some confusion as to, and I thought to you, Ryan, about where the connection was into the street and having to, he was told the street would have to be tore up. I think there's just a lot of miscommunication. We don't have to take that lead, but I think we should, to be honest with you. I mean, people make comments about that building. They've been doing it for 15, 20 years. I think it's something we need to take a lead on at least, and maybe it's a partner or helping him get grants or whatever. But if he's not motivated because I think he doesn't quite understand the process or what the cost might be, and any way we can help in that, otherwise it's just gonna be here for the next 10 years.
Yeah, we can talk to him. There's a few things to discuss, obviously. We have no idea what's on the inside, so probably have to do an environmental, asbestos and whatever else is in that building before we even begin to tear that down, or anybody thinks about tearing it down. Yes, there's connections into the street, probably gas and water and sewer that might have to be capped, so the street's gonna have to get torn up, yeah. Building's gonna be have to tear down and remove, and what are we gonna restore? Is it gonna be green space? Is it gonna be parking lot? A lot of moving parts to that, but we will engage with Bob. I know there's grants, but I'm positive the grants aren't going to be enough to cover whatever that cost is gonna be for the environmental, the street work, and the tearing down and removal and restoration. But we'll start looking at it.
Before we go too far on the, we will start looking at it. I guess I'd rather start with the conversation on understanding what his goals are and what is his ask. How does he want our help? There's all sorts of projects we could consider. But I think looking a couple of steps around the corner on what is actually the ask and how does that help his business plan? I think just using that as a guide, again, kind of have this feedback in context of where we are with current projects and kind of what the 2024 budget looks like.
Yeah, I know, I think when I said that we would start that conversation, I think that's the conversation we have to do, because we have no idea what his plan is and when he wants it done and what's the future of that spot and all of that. So we will contact him and see what he thinks he wants to do there. Won't go too far yet, but we need to at least initially talk to him. We can do that.
You know, the feedback was made that the city needs to take the lead, and I disagree. We are a city government. We don't get to take a lead on someone else's private property. I think in partnership, yes, but us taking the lead is different than us partnering with a business owner and coming to a good solution.
Yeah, we can't do.
I struggle with us taking the lead without active invitation and active
No,
scoping.
I think what the conversation was guidance. We can't put out the RFP for tearing it down or the environmental or anything like that. That's not, we can't do that. It isn't our property. We can't be the general contractor on tearing this building down. It's just no way. But we can have the conversation with them and say, what do you want to do? And say, okay, if you want to do this, try to maybe give him some guidance on what the list is. First, he has to call DEET and see if there's grants and how much. Then he has to get some kind of an estimate about tearing, what it's going to cost to tear down. I don't know, maybe he has them already. And then what that process is as far as permitting and street opening and sewer capping and water capping. And I mean, we can advise him a little bit, but he's going to have to do most of the work with this. We don't own the property. We are a little bit restricted. I mean, unless the council wants to, at least I'm not recommending this at this point, is to grant him, $200,000 to tear the building down. Okay, then, but that's about all we could do. It's more financial than it is anything else we can do. But we have to have a business assistant policy, and that would allow that, so.
I think so. In a lot of other cases, cities do take the leads in a lot of different cases. If there's a downtown, if there's a property in your downtown that's dilapidated and looks horrible for 20 years,
Talking something different here. If you want us to start, what is
A 463, a hazardous building.
463 hazardous building where we are force the owner to tear it down, we can do that.
No, not at all. I just think
That's
that.
what cities do.
Well, right, but I just think that, I think it's easy to take the lead or partner, but to say no because it's a private property, then it's gonna sit there for whatever, I don't know. This makes comments on a weekly basis about this building.
Well, then I think
And
we
it's
have to
not-
have, I think we have to have a discussion on where the parameters of what staff does versus what the private owner does. I mean, how far do we get into a private owner's business? He may welcome it, but if we tried the same thing with another owner, I mean, how far do we go? Do we write the RFP? Do we get the bids? Do we sign the contracts? That's a long way to go beyond advisory of what we think we can guide him through. I mean, I think we have to start with the conversation, as was mentioned, and guide him through and say, well, here's what you need to do, and give him a checklist and say, try to do all of these things. We can offer that professional type of service, but I tell you, when getting into getting bids for the tear down, getting bids for the plumber to cap the water and the sewer, and things like that, I'm not sure that, I think we're a little bit over our skis on that one.
And I'm not suggesting that at all at this point.
Okay. Right.
I'll be happy to reach out to him. I know that he and I have spoken in the past, and I think that there is this just challenge of maybe what can he do and what is the steps? And we'll talk about it internally before I reach out to him, probably might be the early part of September, but I will do that.
I think also so Abby, thank you for that, and I think that will be helpful. I think ultimately underlying this question is kind of council, I think we're struggling with, is this a carrot or a stick? And are we following the enforcement action that might be us taking the lead from an enforcement standpoint? Or is this us working with a business owner on some sort of a future plan that, and I think we owe that to this conversation once you've had that of where does this go, where does this best land?
Reach out to them and see what we can do. Number 10 and 11, I think we kind of touched on this earlier in the 10-year capital plan, that these are in the 10-year capital plan in 2025 and 26, I think it was mentioned. So I think we're well on the way to those. Those are under your plan, unless we cut it back to no. Sorry. Look into acquiring a certain property for, I've had initial conversations with him. They weren't really positive. We can go back and try again. I think it is a opportunity. It's something we should look at. It's a good spot to have some kind of parking spaces, whether it's surface lots or for the boats, but we'll circle back and see if he's changed any of his attitude.
Yeah, with that said, so the lakefront study that was,
Still
they
going.
did back in January, February, we're still waiting on that?
Yeah, we just met with now that the transition, I just met Abby and I with the consultant, the planner, and we are going to have a small working committee of the watershed district, the Lake Association, ourselves, to go over what that might look like. So we're trying to speed that up, but it has been a little bit too long. So we will meet, I believe the date was September 12th, so start that again. But we will look at number 12. Yeah, he's an interesting fellow. We'll see what we can do. And pickleball court maintenance or repair. I think I sent a memo out to the council regarding pickleball maintenance or repair. The pickleball court's in pretty good shape, actually. We will have somebody come out and look at it. It's only a 5-year-old court. Cracks are hairline at best. I understand the concern of the pickleball. They're advocates. They like their pickleball, great. But I think it's in great shape right now for compared to other recreational facilities and their lifespan. This is doing well because the surface is pretty good. But unfortunately, pickleball has gotten so popular that the only people who do pickleball in the area are kind of backed up with new courts and things. So we will have it looked at and see if there's anything else we can be doing. It will be on our maintenance on our park plan, in the park plan, so we will pay attention to it. But right now, it doesn't need really a lot of attention. It's really actually in great shape for that court.
Are new pickleball courts in the Belts Park plan?
I don't believe they are.
We have new basketball and tennis courts.
Basketball and tennis. You have to be a little bit careful with pickleball because of the noise. Recent stories in recreational things in the recreational world, they're getting neighbor complaints because it's loud. So where we would put the pickleball court in that particular part is pretty residential intensive, and the natural place would be where the tennis court was, but it backs up right to all of that. So if we were to add additional pickleball courts, I wouldn't recommend it being in Belts Park. I'd recommend it in finding its expansion in Fenway or some other park that has no residential around it, because you'll just start getting noise complaints because it is a loud game. Plastic, you'd be surprised. And,
Yeah, I didn't know.
that literature is saying it's becoming more and more an issue with people in their yards and pickleball courts. So that's it.
Good. I think we skipped over, we had an item on the agenda specific around lighting of the bridge and potential.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
Yes.
okay. Want to maybe circle back on that before we adjourn?
Yeah, it's been suggested, holiday, right, for the holiday, that the bridge, Broadway Bridge, the bicycle trail, the Hardwood Creek Trail Bridge, be lit in some way for the holidays. If that was a council desire, we would need to do a few things, and some of it's already been started with, discussions with the county. It more comes down to, will they let us do it, A, and B, just how it would happen, what the cost would be. Probably hire a contractor to do lights, I assume, to just put them up on an annual basis, or at least the first year basis. Electrical is an issue, whether we could plug into a street light or it has to be, you have to put a new circuit in somehow. We've started to look at that. If that's a desire of the council, we can bring a cost back if that's something you want to look at.
Initial conversations, what was the planned timing, like, as this
That'd be
conversation is?
pretty soon, because you gotta book, I would think you'd wanna book those things with those vendors pretty quickly.
I mean, the thought is we would do it this year? Is it
I believe that is the desire.
have an estimate for cost?
Not yet. No, we have to work on that. We have to know what the county's gonna require for electrical service, whether we can plug in just to a streetlight pole, or they're going to have to actually have a service, which means we'd have to run an electric up somewhere up there and plug it in costly. So we have a little more work to do if the council wants to do that.
So the cost part that we do have from one vendor is $8,900, and that's purchasing the lights and having them put up and then removed.
Yeah, I couldn't open the
Okay.
we have just a, I mean, we have kind of a cost here. It may go up a little bit more, but
Yeah, I mean, if it's feasible time-wise, I'd be interested to know what that is for this year, if it's feasible.
And two things we have to just flesh out is we may be required to do structural and electrical engineering plans, like a full plan set, and may or may not have to have hardwired electricity. And I don't know those answers yet. So I'm working with Washington County to see what they're gonna require for sure. Once I know what those requirements, then I can get costs, but until I know what's required. I mean, if you can go off the pole and that solves your problem for electrical work, then that's basically an extension cord. But if they require tying off a transformer and running conduit up to the bridge, then you're gonna cost more than what the lights are gonna cost to put up for the year. So that'll be the decision you have to make, but hopefully I can hear back from them hopefully by the end of the month to know what those costs will be.
I also think, looking at the budget for 2024, I would prefer go down this route next year. Because I think there's a few more things that are pressing, like the jobs, the parks, and all the other things that we need, so.
I guess for me, it depends on what you find in that initial scoping. If this is small and we can do it with minimal cost, then maybe it's a nice, easy lift that fits. It's hard to make that call until we know what some of those initial, how broad the project's going to be. And it sounded like, did you say you'd have that by the end of the month?
Yeah, I got multiple feelers out at the county to see what we can get away with or not get away with.
In conversation with the chamber as well, partnering up with them as a funding source or to sponsor the lights, so it's not all in the city. But maybe it's that piece of it, the electrical part of it, and businesses raise the rest of it.
come back to the council for more information.
Sounds good. Broad topics tonight, lots of discussion. Anything else for councils? Staff, you have what you need from us as far as feedback? Excellent. That is the end of our planned agenda, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
A motion and a second. All those in favor signal by saying aye.
Aye.
Oppose, and we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
I knew it was in there. I just couldn't